it's like 90% of the cultural DNA of those movements is the same. Even the sparkly fingers. We're doing event sparkly fingers, okay?
No. Brooke, just quickly mentioning, was one of the people who was very critical in mobilizing Seattle. So it's interesting because she's really excited about this, but if you have questions about that stuff, she's another person you can talk to.
So I was very active in this movement. I was a summit hopper. I learned this tradition, and I'm very grateful for it. And I thought it was, this is so great. But then, sort of like, you start realizing that there's zombies in the closet, there's, horrific things about this model. When we lost nonviolent discipline, I had people that started advocating about bombing the police procession of the president. Okay, that's not a funny conversation, that's really serious. People could do really serious jail time for that. People started throwing Molotov cocktails at protests, and also the momentum died. I love the movement, and I think it created a lot of things, but it died. And with that was my community that I love so much. And for me, that's my salvation, is my community. That's why I organize. Now all of a sudden my community with the momentum dies. And I say, I can't live this way, where I develop a community and give my heart to it. And I didn't know how to make it other than a flash in the pan. So I learned that tradition and thought it was so awesome. And it could do things that structure couldn't, but I needed something different. So I went back to the labor movement and said, structure is the way, it's a flash in the pan, I like doing the momentum stuff, but I don't know if we can control it. Then something else happened. These are Seattle pictures. Los Angeles, the immigrant rights movement. And we were in the middle of it because the labor movement in Los Angeles is sort of the institutional force of a lot of the immigrant rights movement in Los Angeles. And because I had done this momentum stuff, a lot of the immigrant rights leaders were like, Paul, what the hell is happening? Our numbers, they don't work anymore. And I'm like, I know. So I was invited into a lot of strategy meetings and whatever. And I think one of the most distinct one is we were organizing these workers on this hotel strip. And it's really hard to organize non-union workers who are like pissed at the union. And these organizers spend 6 months like trying to find ways to go to their church and relate to them. And they looked up on the television, they saw some of the workers that were non-union, that hated the union, in the immigrant rights marches. And no one had mobilized them through relationships. And they're like, holy shit, this is more, like a whole 1.2 million people marched. That's a huge section of the entire Los Angeles population. There was a general strike that shut down the ports, fast food industry, the hotel industry, all shut down for a day. There were walkouts that were bigger than anything that was experienced in the civil rights movement, with tens of thousands of kids, huge millions of people in the school districts in Los Angeles, Chicago, or whatever. They shut down the school districts for days, sometimes 2 days, because of walkouts that happened around this. It was so much activity that a lot of people who were in the movement didn't even know everything that was happening. It was a whirlwind. And I said to myself, we have to figure out how to replicate this thing. So I started getting a group of people together to form an immigrant rights coalition to figure out how we are going to keep the momentum going. Because I didn't want to see my community fall apart. And as a fluke, we ended up at a conference. ICNC gave us money to do a conference, just to fly everyone in. And we met the Serbian revolutionary. And at first, I just have to be honest, I was very arrogant. I felt like I know how to do nonviolence trainings, so why in the hell are they flying somebody from Europe, from Serbia, here to train me how to organize, okay? So we're going to take the money, we're going to do your little training, and then we're going to have the meetings at night, okay? That's the real meeting, and then we'll do your training in the day. But, so I showed up, and basically I was introduced to my guru. I now bow to the greatness of the Serbian Revolution. So they came, and they formed a movement in Serbia that overthrew the dictator Milosevic. And Milosevic was called the Butcher of the Balkans. He was very entrenched, very, very powerful. And they created what I call the first decentralized organizational nonviolent movement. It was very different than how a lot of other people organized because it was incredibly decentralized. Kind of like our momentum structure. But it had lots of structure. It had decentralized organizational structure. And I didn't think that was possible, and I was kind of tinkering about how do we combine structure and momentum, these two traditions. But they had, the analogy I use is I was tinkering, trying to create a new car, trying to bring in a new transmission, and they drive up in a Ferrari, and they're like, hey, look at the car, look at the engine, you know, and I was blown away, and I had this real totally reorientation about how to organize based on integrating structure and momentum, those two schools that I was trained in. And they, Ivan Marovic, I've done probably a dozen trainings with him with different groups. JLI did a presentation, that's how we met. And really what it was is trying to translate a lot of the lessons that the Serbians learned. And they didn't just create a model, but they trained a lot of other people. They did mass trainings for groups all over the world. Now, those trainings aren't the end-all be-all. You can't just give somebody a training and the revolution happens. Like a lot of conspiracy theorists believe that the Serbians are lizard people that control the world and that they're actually creating...
That's not true.
Yeah, well, I've seen this man do a lot of things, and I've never seen the lizard skin, okay? So, he's not a lizard person, and he doesn't control it, because they have agency, and what he gives them is trainings and stuff. And part of that is what we're going to give you. But it took us a lot of time to realize that even though a lot of us was having these breakthroughs, a lot of us weren't when we were doing trainings with the Serbians, and we thought that there needed to be a way to translate that material for a U.S. audience. So that is really why I'm here right now, is because I'm trying to figure out a way to systematize and train. And what they did in Serbia that's super unique is they really thought about organizing culture and tradition. Most people in the United States, a lot of times, are stuck in their own little bubble of their own organizing tradition. And if I ask sometimes people in Unite here who train me, or even my mentor, like, how do you organize? She has one way she organizes, and that's the structured tradition. And she doesn't understand that there's other traditions. So what the Serbians did is they thought about structure and momentum, and they thought about it like a fish in water. They started looking at the water and saying, what is the organizing traditions? What are organizational structures? And then they said, we have to institutionalize and systematize it. So if we're going to build a decentralized movement, we can't have leaders just understand this. Everyone has to understand this. Because if the movement is not going to be crazy and we're not going to lose control, everyone has to have a higher level of strategic knowledge to be on board. That was their big revelation. And so they did mass trainings, and these mass trainings were bigger than anything we had ever seen. 40,000 people went through week-long trainings on brand strategy, and a lot of the stuff that we're going to tell you here. And that made it so that they could keep the momentum going for years on end. So we're going to ask you to think about what is the organizing cultures you come from, so that we can be conscious and intentional about changing them. So first I just want to, there's the two traditions that I'm coming from that I've seen in the United States organizing culture is really two dominant organizing traditions. There are some other different experimental organizing traditions, but I think these two are the ones we really want to focus on, because I think a lot of you have had experience in these, and these are the ones that sort of you see in Occupy or what I've experienced most in my life too. What are those traditions? Oh. So one is, we call it the structured tradition. This intellectual, Charles Payne, who's a civil rights historian, he said that in the civil rights movement there was really two traditions. There was one which he called the community organizing tradition and the community mobilizing tradition. And we call this the community organizing tradition, and he said it was embodied by Ella Baker, who was this incredible organizer who really believed in building structure and indigenous leadership. And a lot of the leadership in the civil rights movement and the hardcore leadership development was done by her or the people that took her philosophy of doing structure-based organizing. Alinsky and that school of organizing was really systematized, so a lot of people that the Midwest Academy and NOI, PICO, a lot of them come out of that tradition indirectly sometimes. It's evolved since then, but it's a lot of the same lessons. And you'll probably see that when you see an organizer from the same basic tradition. You're like, oh yeah, you got like secret handshakes, and you know how to do little numbers, and you know confirmation, and you know you have a lot of the same vocabulary. So there's a whole field, and there's a lot of books and training about this model. And one of the things it's really big on is house visits. So one-on-one, when we were doing labor organizing, it was all, you couldn't talk to people in workplaces because the employer wouldn't let you. So you had to go to people's houses and you have these really intense emotional conversations in their living rooms. And there's a lot of crying involved. And that, you're developing trust and organizing, and we call it pushing or challenging people to take stances and get over their fear and organize. And there's deep leadership development. In the workplace, it's not the only way, in the way we organize, which is bottom up in the workplace, is that people have to trust the people in their workplace, and there's natural leaders. You have to find them, and they have to become the leaders of the union, or else you're not going to be able to go on strike or do anything. So it's about how do you find the gems of people and recruit them. People who aren't naturally politicized, and develop their leadership. And we're really good at that. And I learned that when I was at Unite Here. This is another thing that they're really good. They're very good at creating these large actions, picket lines. We call them delegations, where workers stop work during their break, all go out against the middle manager or sometimes the CEO. PICO and a lot of Linskyite, they do these accountability sessions where they mobilize everybody specifically to create very targeted leverage of the power that they have among their base. To get hundreds of people to really direct their anger and have very specific demands. And then there was the other tradition. And I call this momentum tradition. I'm very grateful for the people who have kept this tradition alive. I think George Lakey has this institute called Training for Change that has kept a lot of the lessons of the Clamshell Alliance and this organization called the Movement for a New Society, which no longer exists, but created this sort of model of organizing and taught a lot of people. Lisa Fithian, I don't know if you know it, she kind of goes around and plans big-ass protests. I was trained by her for a little while. These guys really kept this tradition, and this tradition is really good at a lot of different things. And we see it in like the anti-nuclear movement is where they first started this. And what it was is using these consensus-based general assemblies and spokes councils and affinity groups to absorb lots of momentum to do really militant actions. It's almost kind of like concert promotion. It's really about organizing people outside of structures to create loose networks and structures. So the anti-nuclear movement and Clamshell Alliance created many different mass civil disobedience and occupations that changed the whole debate in the United States of America around nuclear power, and that's really where it was developed. And when the momentum's right, these organizations, this model can really create mass-scale actions like structure can. And it's not incremental change, it's an explosive growth. So I think one of the things that drives that momentum is escalating nonviolent action, mass action. And this tradition, I just want to say, the people in the Clamshell Alliance and other people in this tradition, they got a lot of their work from a certain segment of the Gandhian independence movement and Gandhi's theory around what's called satyagraha, which was kind of his concept of nonviolent warfare. And he said that soul force, which is his concept of momentum, was created through individual sacrifice. And in that tradition in the United States of America, a lot of times it's mass arrest and escalating nonviolent action that creates the crisis that pulls people in. And one of the things that is really unique about this tradition is if you talk about the biggest protest in American history in the last 20 years, whether it's ACT UP, anti-nuclear movement, the anti-war movement, the anti-globalization movement, Occupy, all of those moments of the whirlwind where tons of different people started participating because the momentum was so hot. And what I mean by moments of the whirlwind, it was coined by the Linskyite organizer, Van Hoffman, who was a disciple of Linsky during the Civil Rights Movement. And he did the same thing I did. He was having this little meeting, it was this in Chicago, to a church. He was mobilizing people to listen to a freedom rider in the Civil Rights Movement. And they thought they were going to get like 50 or maybe 100 people, and like 500 people showed up to this church outside of his numbers. And he called Saul Alinsky and he said, I can't explain this. This is a moment of the whirlwind. So much is happening outside of our structure, and it's driven by momentum, not by relationship and not by structure. And he said it was the moment of the whirlwind, and that's what we call the moment when you hit climax and thousands of people are participating. And this tradition really creates some of those. In the civil rights movement, we've seen that. The lunch counter sit-ins in the civil rights movement. When you really study the history of this, you realize that it wasn't just one place kind of created a lot of the momentum, but it started spreading virally in ways that no one really expected. Martin Luther King didn't really believe that momentum was possible and that you could create moments of the whirlwind. And he said it wasn't anything he did, it was the students that got him to have the faith that you could create a moment of the whirlwind. Because he saw it with the lunch counter sit-ins and the work of James Lawson, who we've all met, who kind of created the framework of this tradition in the United States. The Birmingham campaign, these campaigns really grab the nation's attention like few things have. This is an iconic shot of people being sprayed by water hoses, and still to this day, a lot of people in my parents' generation, you ask them of the images that they remember of the civil rights movement, this is probably one of them, or dogs being bitten, or the March on Washington, the Selma March. These were all climactic moments of the whirlwind. And what was really unique is that in the civil rights movement, they actually believed, had the faith, and for a period of time, they were able to create moments of the whirlwind through a tradition, an organizing tradition that taught them how to do it. I saw it in the anti-war movement. What was that day again, Mark?
February 15th, 2007.
That day was, the New York Times called it one of the largest days of world protest in the history of the world. This is where it was in Rome, in Spain, London, and then 2006, the Immigrant Rights March. I experienced the moment of the whirlwind, and it changed my life. Wisconsin, Colorado, Occupy Wall Street was another one, and Occupy Wall Street really changed things. I think in some ways, it really created a different climate for a lot of these ideas, because I had been talking a lot, and I had a group of people. It wasn't just me. There was a whole crew of people that were experimenting and systematizing this and bringing a lot of lessons that we learned. But Occupy really changed the equation, because now all these people, not just immigrant rights leaders, but all these people said the moment of the whirlwind is where it's at, because Occupy changed public opinion in ways that people had never seen before. And it actually, that change in climate has still affecting the labor movement. There's still a lot of campaigns that they can win because of the public opinion change. Like the millionaire, we got a millionaire tax in California. It was dead on arrival when we proposed it, and now it's actually a possibility we won it. There's a lot of other things that we couldn't have done if we didn't have that change. But people say this all the time, but it's not just structure, it's not just momentum. You know, people are a mix between the two, and that's true. So what we like to see is that there's traditions that are more just about the sort of concert promotion, momentum-driven organizing, and there's traditions that are more ideologically just structure. But a lot of times people, it's not just us, a lot of people have thought about how to mix it together. Gandhi was amazing in this. He believed that you need to have different wings of the movement that all played different roles in this whole ecology. But he believed in the moment of the whirlwind, kind of like a science. He believed that you could create it, and that wing of the movement was the most important one because it changed the weather for everyone else to act. So he also believed in a constructive program, which was creating like countercultural institutions and ashrams and things, and a political party. So he integrated these two, and that's one of the reasons why the Indian independence movement was one of the best organized movements that struggled and did mass general strikes and hartals and things for 20 years or more, 40 years, is because they kept on absorbing the momentum, because he knew how to integrate both the creating momentum and absorbing it. And so Marshall Gantz is actually, he's really good at systematizing